Alright, in this video I'm going to show you the game controller and some of the properties you can modify on it to basically change the way your game behaves. So we're going to start, we're here in scene gameplay, which is kind of the meat of the game, and you'll see in the hierarchy we have the game controller object. Now this script has a lot of properties you can modify to kind of tweak the way your game's going to work. Let's start here looking at the all levels array under levels. This is basically a list of all the difficulty levels that can be played within this scene. So starting at night one here, you'll see each difficulty level has a title, which gets displayed to the player when you start the game. We have a difficulty scale, which is between 1 and 100, and this basically just changes how hard the AI in the level is going to be. Then we have a time start and a time end. This is basically the hour at which it will be displayed to the player that the level starts and the hour that it ends. And this controls basically the length of your night. So here we have it set to 23, which is, it's on a 24-hour clock, so this would be 11 o'clock. And then time end is 29, and that's because basically it wraps around. So this is actually 5 a.m. If you wanted, you could do something like 0 and 6. So this would start the game at midnight and end at 6 a.m. You could do even longer. You could do 9 a.m. You could do a full day. You could go even longer if you really wanted. It doesn't really matter. It's just a matter of how long you want your night to be and when you want to start and end. Next, we have the next level index. Now this is what tells the game which difficulty level to go to upon completing this one. So it's a zero-based index, which means it's pointing to right now index 1, which is actually night 2. So you'll see here that night 2 points to next level index 2, which is actually night 3, and then so on all the way up to night 5. And then next we have the next scene index, and this is the index of the scene that will be loaded when completing this game. Right now it's set to scene index 2, which is in our build settings here, scene gameplay. So basically all it's saying is that it's going to reload this scene every time you start it. So you get a fresh copy of the scene basically. Um, you can use this to actually change scenes at the end of the level. So for example, in night 5, it actually goes to scene index 3, which is the congratulations screen. But you could also use this if you want to kind of change up your game. You could make different copies of the gameplay scene, and you could actually do things like change up the level layout. You could change up the enemy paths and routes and graphics and things like that. And you could actually have this go through a series of different scenes if you wanted to. So there's a lot you can play around with there. And then lastly, we have the level start sound effect. And this is the phone call sound that gets played upon starting the level. Um, and then, yeah, you can see each night is basically the same in that regard. So moving on, we have the time scale. This is how quickly the time in-game will pass. So right now it's set to 60, which means that 1 minute of, or 1 second, sorry, of real time is equal to 60 seconds of game time. This means that 1 hour in the game will actually take 1 minute to complete in real time. If you wanted, you could speed up or slow down the speed of your game by either, lowering or raising this. But by default, it's set to 60. In the next section, we have some sound effects, and these are basically the ambient sound effects that are going to get played throughout your level. Um, we have here the ambient loop, and this is basically just a background noise track that's going to be played the entire time. We have a list of random sound effects, and these get interspersed randomly throughout the level as you're playing at random intervals. That's controlled by this random clip delay, which is basically just a minimum and a maximum time between playing these sounds. And then finally we have a sound effect to play upon successfully completing the level. In the next section we have our power management. This is where you control the total amount of power that you have to play with during the game. By using different elements in the level, things like the doors or the light switches, or looking at the cameras, you use up power every second while you're doing it. So basically, this is the total amount of power that you have. Uh, if you look at, say, the door switch here, you'll notice there's this door button script, and this has a power drain component on it. This basically tells the game how much power to drain every second that it's active. So you'll see here the door takes 2 power per second, the light takes 1 power per second, and that's the same on both sides. And then the camera is controlled on the game controller, where we have under the camera section the camera power. So it takes 2 power per second. You can raise these or lower them to make the game easier or harder, depending on which elements you're using. We also have this base power drain if you wish to use it. It's basically, you can set this to active and the entire game your power will be draining a little bit. This could be used to increase tension if you really wanted and have it so like, oh, because the lights are on and the computer's on, your power is very slowly draining at all times, and it could maybe make the game a little more hectic or more difficult to play. By default, this is off. You can turn it on if you want. And then the last thing we have here is the all cameras array, and this is basically just a list of all the cameras in the level that can possibly be viewed at any time. The first entry always has to be the gameplay camera, which is basically your office cam, the one that you start the game viewing. The rest of the cameras in this list are cameras that you can, like security cameras that you can view while looking at the cameras on the computer. So if you wanted to add or remove cameras, this is where you'd do it. I'll go into that more in a later video. The rest of the elements on the game controller script are basically related to the user interface, and you probably don't need to change these very much unless you're planning on drastically overhauling the interface, which this video series isn't going to go into. So, but if you ever want to, play around with any of these elements, this is where they're hooked up to the game controller.